The moment. Britain is mourning Anne Widdecombe. The news has come suddenly, and the shock is real, felt across Westminster, across the Conservative Party she served for more than 2 decades, and across the broader public who knew her as one of the most unmistakable figures in British political life. She was 78. A life of conviction has ended, and the country is sitting with what that life meant. The chart cast for this moment carries a quiet, deliberate gravity. The sun sits in Cancer, the sign of home, family, and national belonging. This is not a moment of spectacle, but of roots. Cancer speaks to the emotional bonds that hold a nation together, and the sky at this hour turns attention toward those bonds, what a people inherits, what it preserves, what it owes to the figures who shaped its public life. The moon, which in political astrology reflects the mood of the public, rests in Taurus. Taurus is the sign of steadiness, patience, and stubborn endurance. This is not a volatile grief, it is a deep, slow, patient mourning, the kind that settles in and stays. There is something remarkably fitting about the ascendant of this chart. The ascendant is the degree rising on the eastern horizon at the moment in question, and it describes the character of that moment. Here it falls at 29 degrees of Virgo, the very last degree of the sign. In astrology, the final degree is called the anaretic degree, representing completion, the end of a long process, the closing of a chapter. Virgo is the sign of service, duty, and precision. That the moment of Widdecombe's passing carries this signature feels almost written, a life of dutiful public service, marked by exactness and conviction, arriving at its final degree. The period around this moment is extraordinarily charged. In the days that follow, July 15th through July 25th, the sky delivers a rare cluster of outer planet alignments. Mundane astrologers weight these heavily because they describe deep, collective shifts rather than passing weather. Uranus, the planet of reform and sudden change, forms harmonious angles to both Neptune, the planet of collective ideals and dreams, and Pluto, the planet of power, transformation, and the death and rebirth of institutions. Jupiter, the planet of meaning, faith, and expansion, aligns with Neptune and Uranus while also standing opposite Pluto, creating a productive tension between growth and concentrated power. These are the signatures of a period when institutions, ideas, and political alliances are being reformed at a structural level, a fitting backdrop for the passing of a figure who spent her life challenging institutions, and who in her 70s returned to electoral politics to challenge them again. The months leading into this moment built toward it with a steady accumulation of what astrologers call cardinal energy, the quality that signals initiative, new beginnings, and decisive action. Mars, Mercury, Venus, and the Sun all entered cardinal signs, specifically Aries and Cancer, in sequence between April and June, creating a rising tide of forward momentum focused on national identity and English political life. Aries, in traditional mundane astrology, is the sign associated with England itself, and Cancer governs homeland and belonging. The sky was building toward a moment of reckoning with English identity. Widdecombe's passing arrives at the crest of that wave. The cyclic index, a measure of overall planetary tension that ranges from roughly 0 to 1800, sits at 828, which is moderate. Over the 6 months surrounding this event, it ranges from 755 to 890. This tells us the period is not one of extreme collective crisis, but of measured, significant change, the kind that reshapes things steadily, rather than all at once, a fitting tempo for the processing of a legacy. What it touches. The planetary positions at the moment of Widdecombe's passing, measured against the sky at her birth on October 4, 1947, tell a story of recognition, amplification, and deep re-examination. Born with the sun in Libra, the sign of justice, balance, and the weighing of competing claims, Widdecombe carried a core identity oriented toward fairness and principle. Libra is the diplomat sign, the sign of those who care about proportion and getting the balance right. But she was no one's idea of an equivocating diplomat. Her chart carried powerful counterweights, Mercury in Scorpio and Mars in Leo, 2 placements that brought intensity, pride, and a refusal to soften the message. Mercury governs communication and the working of the mind. In Scorpio, it is the signature of a mind that penetrates rather than skims. Scorpio is the sign of depth, intensity, and unflinching honesty. People with this placement do not shy from difficult subjects, they are drawn to them. In Widdecombe's case, this was the engine behind her famous bluntness, the willingness to say what she meant, to name what others would not, to argue from conviction rather than calculation. She was not a politician who hedged, and her Scorpio Mercury wouldn't let her. Mars, the planet of drive and the warrior instinct, sits in Leo, the sign of the lion, regal, theatrical, unapologetic. This placement describes a person whose convictions are proudly displayed, who enters every battle as though the stakes are personal. Together with her Libra Sun and her Scorpio Mercury, this Mars in Leo completed a character uniquely equipped for the kind of politics she practiced, principled, combative, and impossible to ignore. At the moment of her passing, Jupiter, the planet of meaning, faith, and expansion, sits almost exactly on her natal Mars. In astrology, this is a conjunction, 2 planets occupying the same degree. When the planet of meaning meets the planet of conviction, it amplifies. This is the signature of a moment when the fighting spirit is recognized without dilution. For Widdecombe, who built a career on the courage of her convictions, this is perhaps the most fitting signature in the chart, her warrior nature illuminated by Jupiter's light at the moment the nation turns to remember her. Because Jupiter also rules religion, this same alignment reflects her devout Catholic faith, the wellspring of her convictions on social issues, her opposition to abortion, and her commitment to traditional moral teaching. Her faith and her fighting spirit were never separate things. The chart sees them as one. Jupiter also forms a sextile, a supportive 60-degree angle to her natal moon. In a public figure's chart, the moon represents the connection to the public. This suggests the public response carries emotional resonance and warmth, not unanimous agreement with her views, but a genuine recognition of her sincerity. Meanwhile, Saturn, the planet of structure, authority, and legacy, forms a trine, a harmonious 120-degree angle to her natal Pluto. Pluto is the planet of profound, lasting impact. This is one of the heaviest signatures in the chart, and it speaks directly to legacy. The deep structural impact of her life is being consolidated and integrated into the historical record. Saturn trine Pluto is not about sentiment. It is about weight, the recognition that her impact was real and will be reckoned with rather than gently set aside. The event chart itself reinforces this. Saturn sits in Aries, the sign that rules England, in the 8th house. In mundane astrology, the 8th house governs mortality, shared resources, and the deep emotional bonds between a nation and its people. This is the signature of an English establishment figure's passing, the structures of the state encountering the finality of a life that was, for 23 years as MP for Maidstone, part of those structures. Yet there is also a signature of re-examination. Pluto forms a square, a tense 90-degree angle to her natal Mercury. This suggests her words, ideas, and record are not simply being eulogized, but deeply re-examined. Some of her positions will be revisited with new scrutiny, some of her arguments tested against the present. This is not gentle, nostalgic remembering. It is the kind of uncomfortable transformation that Pluto demands. Her legacy will be argued over, not merely admired. Her later career as a broadcaster and author, the novels, the television appearances, the public life after Parliament that kept her in the national eye, is written in the event chart's midheaven in Gemini. The midheaven represents public standing, and Gemini is the sign of communication and media. Widdecombe's second act was not a retreat from politics, but an extension of it through different channels. Her public identity was always about the broadcast of conviction. Her return to frontline politics with the Brexit Party in 2019 and her subsequent involvement with Reform UK is perhaps the most Uranian chapter of her life. Uranus, the planet of reform, disruption, and the overturning of established order, sits prominently in the event chart in Gemini, near the midheaven. This is the signature of a reformer who used communication as a weapon. At the moment of her passing, Uranus forms a quincunx, an awkward 150-degree angle that signals adjustment to her natal Mercury. This suggests her reformist chapter is also being re-examined, its impact, its meaning, and its place in the larger story of British politics. How it rolls forward. The weeks and months after this moment carry the imprint of that rare cluster of outer planet alignments. Between July 15th and July 25th, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and Jupiter form a web of connections that describe a period of deep reform and institutional transformation. This is the astrological weather in which Widdecombe's legacy will be processed, not in calm, settled conditions, but in a period of collective questioning. Her legacy will not be quickly packaged. The Pluto square to her natal Mercury ensures her ideas will be revisited, sometimes contentiously. The Saturn trine to her natal Pluto ensures her structural impact will be taken seriously despite this re-examination. And the Jupiter conjunct her natal Mars ensures the quality most people associate with her, conviction, and the willingness to fight, will endure in public memory. In August, Venus enters Libra, Widdecombe's natal sun sign. Venus is the planet of values and social cohesion, and Libra is the sign of justice and balance. This ingress suggests the conversation shifts from shock toward a more measured appreciation of her principles, not agreement, but recognition. The country begins to weigh what she stood for, rather than simply reacting to her passing. Watch for the public conversation to evolve through these phases, an initial period of steady mourning under the Taurus moon, a deeper re-examination under the Pluto-Mercury square, and eventually a settled assessment of her values as Venus enters her sun sign. Watch also for reform energy in the political landscape to keep her name connected to debates about the future of British conservatism. She bridged the old Conservative Party and the new reform movements, and that bridge will be walked again in the months to come. Summary. The astrology of Anne Widdecombe's passing describes a moment of deep national reflection on a life defined by conviction, faith, and an unyielding willingness to fight for principle. We should watch for her legacy to be consolidated with genuine gravity rather than mere sentimentality driven by Saturn trine her natal Pluto. Watch for her fighting spirit and conviction to be the quality most honored in public memory, driven by Jupiter conjunct her natal Mars. Watch for her words, ideas, and political positions to be deeply re-examined and possibly reinterpreted, driven by Pluto squaring her natal Mercury. Watch for the conversation to shift from shock toward a measured weighing of her values and principles, driven by Venus entering Libra in August. Watch for her name to remain connected to ongoing debates about the future of British conservatism and reform politics, driven by Uranus in Gemini near the event chart's midheaven. And watch for a public mood of steady, patient mourning rather than volatile grief, driven by the moon in Taurus in the event chart. A life of conviction has ended, and the sky that marks its passing insists that such a life be reckoned with, not lightly, not simply, but with the same seriousness with which it was lived. Recent history and where this is heading. Widdecombe's passing doesn't arrive in isolation. It lands during one of the rarest alignments of our era, Saturn conjunct Neptune at 0 degrees Aries, exact in February 2026, and deepening through the year. Saturn is consolidation, structure, the weight of what endures. Neptune is dissolution, the blurring of old certainties. Together at the very first degree of the zodiac, they symbolize ideologies being tested and rebuilt from the ground up. A life defined by conviction, now being weighed under exactly that sky, is less coincidence than resonance. Through the summer, the same slow currents keep moving. On August 31st, Jupiter trines Saturn, a once-in-2 decades marker of how political and economic eras settle into new shapes. The symbolism suggests that what is being dismantled and what is being honored may start crystallizing into something more lasting than sentiment. Meanwhile, Uranus trining Pluto from mid-July carries an undertow of deeper institutional upheaval beneath the surface. Stories that look entirely unconnected, a stateswoman's legacy, a nation's steady grief, the quiet remaking of political structures, share the same weather. The wheel turns and old certainties dissolve into something not yet fully formed.